Hello everyone, this is Víctor Zapatero from the University of Vigo in Spain. Thanks a lot in the first place to the organizing committee for making this online event possible and the program committee for giving me the chance to present this talk, which by the way, I hope you enjoy. This work is a collaboration between the group of Feihu 2 from the University of Science and Technology of China and the group of Curty at the University of Vigo in Spain. As you can see, the title of the talk is Experimental QKD Secure Against Malicious Devices. To state it shortly, what we do is we report on the first QKD implementation robust against malicious QKD equipment, and it is based on the use of redundant devices and distributed QKD post-processing. In the first part of the talk, I will introduce the main theoretical background, and then in the second part, my colleague Wei will describe its experimental implementation. The first question we need to ask is, why bother considering malicious devices in QKD? And to create awareness of this problem in this slide, we have some very controversial reports of massive security breaches in conventional hardware. Maybe some of you have heard of this news because for sure they had a huge media impact. And the question arises of whether or not things like this may affect QKD as well. And by things like this, I'm talking about backdoors, I'm talking about covert channels, malware, and so on. And if you think about it, the answer is yes, of course. I mean, why not? After all, the manufacture of QKD hardware involves various parties, and this may provide IF with multiple opportunities to sabotage the QKD equipment before it reaches the end users. So, this being the situation, simply assuming the honesty of all the devices held by Alice and Bob is probably unjustified and over-optimistic. At this point, one might think, isn't DIQKD a solution to that problem? And the answer is no, it is not. Okay, DIQKD has a great advantage that it circumvents the need to model the devices in such a way that one can't forget about implementation flaws. However, it is not secure if the devices are not only faulty but actually malicious, as illustrated for instance by the so-called memory attacks proposed some years ago in this article from PRL that you can see in this slide. And the idea behind these kind of attacks is that you may have a large bell violation in a CHSH test, and so testifying massive non-local correlations between Alice's and Bob's outcomes. However, the final output you get out of that process is just a pair of classical keys, and classical objects can be copied. And once these keys are copied, the malicious equipment could have plenty of time and opportunities to covertly leak them to IF. In addition, it is well known that DIQKD has prohibitive implementation and performance limitations with current technology. On the contrary, the approach we will present here has essentially the same performance as standard QKD. But leaving DIQKD aside, the ideal solution would be to verify the integrity of the different QKD components, and this is what we refer to as post-fabrication tests. However, this kind of tests is not an option in practice either. Just imagine the amount of time that it takes for Alice and Bob to validate every component of their QKD system, which basically looks like the main figure in this slide. If you look at the figure, what you will see is a huge amount of complex optical components and electronics. And what is more, malicious equipment could be very tricky. It could be designed, for instance, in order to just misbehave one time out of every 100 times. And if this is what they do, for sure, with a huge probability, they will evade the post-fabrication tests. And at the same time, one key out of every 100 keys that you generate will be compromised. So, what is the idea behind our QKD experiment? The triggering idea was recently presented by Curty and Hoi-Kwong Lo in NPJ Quantum Information, and it is the following simple argument. It is probably harder for IF to tamper with several devices than a single device, especially if they originate, for instance, from different vendors. Therefore, the parties should use a redundant number of QKD devices, and the best they can assume is that a limited number of them is corrupted. If this is actually the case, security can be restored by combining two well-known techniques, which are verifiable secret sharing and privacy amplification. And it is crucial to notice that this is the best one can expect, okay? Since QKD devices cannot be verified in a secure way, then either one blindly trusts his equipment, which is strongly discouraged by our experience in classical crypto, or one tries to relax the assumptions. And this is what we do in this approach. In our approach, QKD will be insecure if several devices are compromised, not if just one device is compromised. So we are minimizing the risk. Also, it is worth mentioning that secret sharing, which is the main ingredient of verifiable secret sharing, is the standard technique deployed in conventional security hardware design to defeat hardware Trojans. So, in this sense, we're just adapting a very well-known technique for the task of key generation. And at this point, maybe you are kind of convinced that it makes sense to use a redundant number of QKD devices, but still one can ask, if we have various independent QKD setups, can we just XOR the keys generated by the different setups? And of course, this is something different to what we propose, because as I said, our proposal builds on verifiable secret sharing and privacy amplification. So first of all, let us clarify why the XOR alternative is actually not working. In the XOR approach, Alice and Bob execute various QKD sessions with independent QKD setups, and in order to construct the final keys, each of them simply XORs all the different output keys. However, this naive technique has various major problems. In the first place, it is very easy to show that it requires more quantum communication devices than actually necessary to establish security. On the other hand, it is true that the XOR of all the keys will be private if at least one pair of keys comes from an honest QKD setup. In this sense, secrecy is preserved in the XOR approach. However, malicious setups could actively deviate from the protocol, and if they do this, correctness is not warranted anymore between Alice's and Bob's keys. This and other problems are fixed in our approach combining verifiable secret sharing and privacy amplification. And in order to explain how these two tools combine, we first need to distinguish the two parts of a QKD setup. For this purpose, here we have a schematic of a standard QKD setup where the devices are trusted. Without loss of generality, each lab can be divided into two parts with separate roles. A QKD module, which is the blue box in the figure, and a classical post-processing unit, which is the pink box. Alice's and Bob's QKD modules are linked by a quantum channel, and in this way they form a so-called QKD pair. The role of the QKD pair is just to generate raw correlated data between the parties through quantum communication, and after this quantum communication phase, each module transfers its raw data to its local CPU unit. Coming next, the two distant units distill a pair of secret keys from the raw data via coordinated classical post-processing and authenticated classical communication. Okay, so far so good, because this is the standard setting. But now we shall move to the setting where not all the devices are trusted, which forces Alice and Bob to use a redundant number of devices, as I said before. In this situation, the alternative setup we suggest looks like this. On the one hand, the parties hold a certain number of QKD pairs, again consisting of two modules linked by a quantum channel. And these are all the pairs of blue boxes that you see in this slide, okay? And on the other hand, each lab contains a certain number of CPU units pairwise connected by secure channels that provide both privacy and authentication. And in addition, every unit is not only linked to the rest of the units in its lab, but also to all of its local QKD modules by dedicated secure channels too. In principle, and this is very important, since all these links take place inside the secure labs, security may be enforced by using physically protected cables, so it does not consume any secret key length. Of course, Alice's units are also linked to Bob's units by authenticated classical channels, and since these links take place between the labs, the authentication unavoidably consumes some extra secret key length compared to the standard setting with trusted devices. However, it is very easy to show that this extra cost is negligible in most practical situations, and in particular it is negligible in our experiment because we quantify it. Now that I have described the setup, probably some of you may be thinking that it is expensive. However, thanks to integrated silicon photonics, and once QKD is widely deployed, prices will probably go down significantly, in such a way that our proposal will become an affordable solution. And not to mention the fact that the post-processing units might be off-the-shelf laptops. Actually, they were off-the-shelf laptops in our experiment, okay? But in any case, using this setup, Curty and Lowe showed that the following assumptions allow for secure QKD. Assumption 1. At least one QKD pair is not corrupted, which means that none of the two modules in the pair are corrupted. Assumption 2. Less than 1/3 of the CP units are corrupted in each lab. And assumption 3. If fully controls all the corrupted devices. Note that this is a very conservative setting that we are assuming here, because in particular Eve has total access to the internal information of the corrupted devices, and she can make them arbitrarily deviate from the protocol prescriptions. Of course, in practice, some QKD users might be interested in less conservative scenarios, and in this sense, in a recent paper, Marcos, Curty, and I have analyzed various alternative corruption models, and we have shown that some of them allow to reduce the resources and enhance the performance. But anyway, our experiment assumes the conservative setting defined above, and the tools to establish security are, as we said before, privacy amplification and verifiable secret sharing. And at this point, we are ready to see how these two tools combine, but for this purpose, we shall refer to our experimental setup directly. What you are seeing here is a schematic of our experimental setup. As you can see in the figure, Bob holds a single QKD module and a single CP unit. We only do this for simplicity, okay? And of course, it implies that both of the devices must be trusted to establish security. On the other hand, Alice has 2 modules and 4 units, which provides protection against one corrupted device of each kind at most. Importantly, despite the fact that Bob's devices are trusted, we deliberately implement all the relevant operations at Alice's side. And this way, we make sure that our experiment is a proof of principle demonstration that the complete post-processing with untrusted devices at both sides is possible. Also, note that we are considering an MDI QKD configuration. Therefore, there exists a fully untrusted measurement node, which is charged in the figure. And all 3 modules are simply QKD transmitters. Broadly speaking, this is how our experiment runs. We have 2 QKD pairs. The first one consists of Alice's first module and Bob's trusted module. And the second one consists of Alice's second module and Bob's trusted module again. We don't know, of course, which of Alice's modules is corrupted, but each QKD pair conducts an MDI QKD session using the central node. And at the end of the session, the node forwards the string of successful events to both modules in the QKD pair. Coming next, the modules forward this information and also the relevant protocol settings and some raw key parameter estimation data to their local CP units. Now, we will focus on Alice's side because Bob's unit is trusted, okay? This is how the post-processing goes. The raw key information that is to be used for key generation must be kept private. So this is where verifiable secret sharing comes into play. And the way it works is as follows. Alice's module splits the raw key into random shares and redundantly distributes them among its local CP units, such that no group of malicious units can collaborate to retrieve the key, and each share is held by a majority of honest units. Intuitively, the first feature is required not to compromise the secrecy, and the second one is required not to compromise the correctness. Then, in order to perform linear operations on the key, which are the ones typically required by QKD post-processing, the units individually apply these operations on their shares, and the final output can be reconstructed from its shares due to linearity. It is crucial that we have linearity here because it makes the implementation of secure multi-party computation techniques very easy. At the end of the day, due to the use of verifiable secret sharing and redundant communication with Bob's units, all honest units at Alice's side reach consistent shares of 2 post-processed key strings, each of them coming from a different QKD pair. But since one of the pairs is potentially corrupted, privacy amplification is required to remove not only the information that Eve learned from her intervention in the quantum channel, but also the one she learned from the corrupted QKD module, in case there is one, okay? Therefore, in a final step, Alice's units redundantly implement privacy amplification on their shares in order to reach shares of the final keys. Now, note that the goal of the key distillation is reached at this point, so in particular our experiment ends here, okay? But in general, at this stage, the units forward their shares of the final key to a key management layer, and there they could be reconstructed by a trusted party. This trusted party, which ultimately could be Alice herself, only needs to select a single copy of each share by applying majority voting, and then XOR all the resulting shares together. Crucially, the fact that each share has been post-processed by a majority of honest units guarantees that this procedure outputs a correct final key, okay? But actually, the final keys don't need to be reconstructed. The shares could be stored in distributed memories or even deployed for applications such as message encryption, which in fact can be performed share-wise too. Okay, so we are now done with this theory part of the talk. Thanks a lot for your attention. Hope you all found it enjoyable, or at least some of you. And it is time now for my colleague Willie to present the experimental part. Thanks a lot again for your attention.
Thanks, Victor. This is Wei Li from the University of Science and Technology of China. I will continue Victor's topic and talk about the protocol implementation. First, let me introduce our 1.25 gigahertz polarization encoding MDI QKD system with a silicon photonic modulation chip. As shown on the figure B, the chip integrates the QKD encoding components of an intensity modulator, polarization modulator, and the variable optical attenuators. As the protocol requires, Alice has redundant QKD module selected by an optical switch because only one QKD module is enabled in each QKD session. Moreover, Alice has 4 post-processing units which are connected to each other via dedicated Ethernet cables, which can satisfy the privacy and authentication requirements of the protocol. It is worth noting that the redundant devices might better be from different vendors. Also, as the setup tolerates a corrupted module and a corrupted unit, it clearly upgrades the security level of the system. After the generation of the raw key material, Alice and Bob go through a post-processing procedure similar to a standard QKD protocol, as shown on the left, but in a distributed fashion. As Victor said, Alice QKD modules distribute shares of the raw keys among the CPU units instead of the original raw key. Particularly, each of them generates 3 random bits stream, and the 4th shares is the XOR result of them with the raw keys. Then, each CPU unit holds 3 shares, and the following operations are performed share-wise. Also, all the units pairwise check the consistency of the protocol information delivered by the modules, and later on, the parameter estimation is performed by 3 units to assure that the majority units participate. These 3 units are the ones communicating to Bob, Unit 2. Coming next, Alice and Bob each performs a random permutation to prevent burst errors, information reconciliation to correct the errors in the raw key stream, error verification to verify that the share streams are indeed identical, and privacy amplification to remove the information that may be known by Eve. I'd like to point out some details of our post-processing task. First, we use a low density parity check code to reconcile the key streams. This algorithm requires only one round of communication, much less communicative than other error correction codes like cascade code. Thus, the authentication cost is minimized. Second, we implement privacy amplification in a single step, as opposed to the original proposal by Marcus Curty and Håkan Low, which required more steps. Using the described setup and protocol, the quantum communication runs for 16,000 seconds for each QKD pair, with an emulated attenuation of 12 dB on each side. In the end, we obtained a secret key rate of about 137 bits per second, disregarding the post-processing time. As the result shows, the secret key rate, considering the dishonest device, is almost half of that of the one with honest devices. This is so because the need to discard a key generated by the potentially malicious QKD pair via privacy amplification when dishonest devices are considered. The authentication cost of the whole session is 960 bits, which is negligible compared to the total secret key, as Victor said before. To finish with, in this slide, we give a simple comparison of Bob's and Eve's attempts to decrypt a message encrypted without output key. In the blue figure, Alice encrypts a grayscale image of a panda with a final key and a one-time pad encryption scheme, and Bob decrypts the image correctly using his final key. The red figure shows Eve's failed attempt to decrypt the encrypted image. Despite her significant knowledge about the cipher key, SA, due to both her possible intervention in the quantum channel and the information revealed by the corrupted devices assumed to be QKD-A1 and CP-A1 for illustration purpose here, who attempt to decrypt the intercepted picture yields a white noise output, fully uncorrelated to the actual picture. However, if, as in standard QKD, only one QKD module and one CP unit are used, if attempt is successful unless both of them are honest. So this is the end of the presentation. Hope you like it, and thank you very much for your time.